Cosmic here, and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra video. Today we're going to be talking about the They Who Endure list. Funny enough, it's actually the list I took from Platinum 4 all the way up to Masters. This occurred over 3 different days, but I did it in 65 matches once I actually kind of sat down and grinded out the games and actually kind of focused on what I wanted to do instead of playing memes. So I could have got there a lot faster, but I just decided to take a break, when I did because of streaming or whatever reason, but regardless, the deck's insane. So today's video is going to be all about talking about it, talking about some card choices, meta matchups, and really just talk overall about how this has come to be and its spot in the meta and all the different decks I was seeing in my playtesting rates and all that kind of good stuff. So there won't be any gameplay. This is strictly going to be a more discussion video where I kind of go through and again talk about those different pieces. So to start off, here's the list. Now, the elephant in the room that I do want to acknowledge right up front is that a lot of people are talking about burn, right? I think that's just something we have to acknowledge. And yes, this list is very good against burn because you're running the Shadow Isles package, but keeping in mind, this is what the deck ran previously with the Omen Hawk is kind of the different one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. That it's the same exact list as last set, a couple new tools, but overall the feel is the same. So yes, you'll see here in the next one where I put the different matches together. It was nice to, farm burn for wins and whatnot, but there needs to be a consideration around just overall good cards and how it lines up in the meta, and then also understanding that Ionia decks will just crush you normally. Obviously, I did a little bit better than I expected based on the numbers that we'll go through, but again, there are other decks that keep this in check, but just really aren't being played around right now. So it's a pretty standard list. And again, there's not going to be any gameplay, so I'm just going to talk about this at a high level. But for those that don't know, basically the entire deck is just chump block your way to victory, sacrifice a bunch of guys, and then you drop a huge They Who Endure. Generally speaking, like a 12-12 is big enough. You just want it to connect once for damage, and then usually Atrocity will finish it off. I didn't actually keep track of the different breakdown from Atrocity versus pure damage, but I actually won a lot more games than I expected that I would purely on damage, right? Because thanks to the Spider package, which is something we've seen in set 1 where you have Elise, Vile Feast, and then Brood Awakening, it does a lot of damage really early on. And what's nice about Omen Hawk is that you can get a 3-4 Elise, which matches up very, very nicely in the current meta. And then just sometimes you high roll with like even Sentry becoming a 3-2 is very relevant for blocking against burn or just blocking against any 3 HP unit. And you get kind of that minimal value or incremental value, I should say, a game over game, or those different plays happen. One of the others, the Steelers here, is Blighted Caretaker. This is a card I really didn't care for in the list all that much, kind of at first look, but it's actually insane. And the reason why it's so good right now, again, partially because of burn, but also just a nod to all aggro decks in general. You'll find yourself in a spot where you have like a Helpless Aristocrat. Obviously, you get 2 blocks of it because once it dies, you get a Spider. Maybe you follow up with an Omen Hawk, but then usually what you're doing is on turn 3 or turn 4, depending on if you have the attack token, you sacrifice one of your early units. You don't really care, and then suddenly you have 2 2-1 challengers, which then help you get in that little bit of extra damage you need against their units that they have. So keeping in mind, this deck is all about that kind of chip damage turn after turn and just value blockers that keep recycling themselves or, again, help towards your end game of getting a really big They Who Endures. So overall, I really do like this list. Again, hasn't changed too much from set 1. And then I think the other big nod that a lot of people, it caught me off guard. So, I've been getting a ton of questions about the card, Fury of the North. Look, at the end of the day, you're going to have a 1-1 Spider on the board. Maybe you have something else, but generally you're going to have a small unit on the board. And what this allows you to do is suddenly turn into a 5-5. So if they get really greedy with their Vi, or if you just have the Sapling, as I mentioned, it's a 2-1 to start, right? You can give it the +4/+4 buff. It's really insane that you can just somehow turn that on, go to attack your opponent's units, and I've removed Heimerdingers that way, I've removed Fioras that way. I've gotten a lot of value just out of having Blighted Caretaker plus Fury of the North. I think it's one of the most underrated combos that could exist in this game. Combo in the sense just meaning 2 cards that work well together. But Fury of the North is great. I really wanted to put it as a 3 of, like, it was just that good when it's good. But I think in that case you might just overdraw it sometimes. But that said, like in the games that it gets that kind of mid-game area, I saw it too, and I was like never upset. So it's one of those things like maybe 2 is just enough. You never want the 3rd, but the card is really great. Definitely try it out, and also try it out in other Freljord decks. Like it's the +4/+4 is huge. Yes, 4 mana is kind of rough, but it's a very, very good card and punished a lot of my opponents. I'll just say what it is. Either they weren't expecting it, or in a lot of cases you just can't play around it. To be fair, but sometimes it just won me the game on the spot because they lost a high value target. So let's go into the actual math behind of it. So keeping in mind that this happened over 3 different days in particular. So my diamond climb happened yesterday, or I guess 2 days now at the time of recording this. I'm recording this very late. And I played 30 games. It was like 31, I think, is what the actual number came out to. But I don't think Mobalytics caught one of the games because when I was going back and trying to do the numbers, I think it dropped one of them. But anyways, around 30 games, crushed it. I did it in 5 hours, D4 to Masters. Played out of my mind, right? I've only lost 5 games, which is insane. And overall had a really good time with it. So I did this breakdown, the wins and losses for each one of those decks I faced against, and then also the percentage of that meta that it made up. So burn was 20% of the games I ran into, right? So that's kind of the math behind it. And I won't spend a lot of time on this. I'm trying to get other Mobalytics data so I can do more analysis like this and more of a deep dive. And then what's interesting about Plat is how you can see how some of those decks shifted, but then keeping in mind that was May 4th and 5th. And I mentioned this in a lot of other videos, and if, not everyone's going to see every video, I get that, so I have to mention it here again. The meta for Runeterra shifts dramatically every 2 to 3 days, right? This isn't like Magic or any JTCG I've played, or just other card games, right? Where you have like a set in stone meta. These are the decks you play, usually figured out within like the first couple weeks, and then it's just slight variations of those lists, right? The thing that Runeterra does very well, and can be frustrating in some cases, is that you have so many viable decks. At the time of recording this, there are still 11 different decks that you can hit Masters with currently. And again, they're not all anti-tech against burn or anything like that. There's just other good lists that can either outrace or you value trade enough where you can still live without healing, right? It's not all 100 or 0 matchups versus burn. There is a lot more play that's happening in Diamond and Platinum. Now, yes, again, burn is a little too strong. I'm not expecting it to get emergency nerfed, right, for lack of a better word, on Tuesday, but I 100% that it'll go on the watch list. They'll have a discussion about it. And then on the 2 weeks after that one is when the balance patch happens. Then we're going to see some changes. I'm guessing it'll be Boom Crew Rookie. That's like the very obvious one. But I'd like something to happen to Fervor, and that's a much different discussion because I think that burn, while it's nice to have that counteractive play, I think that it's a card that was designed for Swain control that's now not really being used in that regard. So maybe it's like an increased cost, maybe you move to slow, maybe you lower the damage. I have no idea what that is. I don't have all the numbers behind the scene, so I'm just kind of guessing, and this is only based on the 200-ish games I've played so far, so it is what it is. Lastly, I have these pure archetype win rate, so this was my matchup versus those types of decks. So against the Mirror, I had an 80% win rate. Against Keg Control, I had a 92% win rate. And yes, that is accurate. So again, this is all public data. It's all from my Mobalytics profile. If you want to go back and double check my numbers or whatever, it's available. So it's all public. It's all out there. There might be like a 1 number typo or something because it's late when I try to pull this all together. But, I'm 95% confident this is 100% accurate across the board. So again, if you want to go back and check, be my guest. But it's probably not a good use of your time, so don't do it. Beyond that, let's talk about the actual matchups, kind of what you're looking for. And this is kind of where it also gets into maybe more of an archetype review in terms of like where its positioning is in the meta and kind of what I overall think about it. So again, because we're playing the They Who Endure deck, this is basically an auto win. I'm just going to call it an auto win for the sake of the discussion, that you play early blockers. So that's step 1. You have to play early blockers against burn, period. Step 2, you have healing, which is really nice. Or you just have enough damage to be able to pressure them back. There was actually some games I've won off 0 damage because, or 0 healing, because they couldn't get any damage through the board. And what a lot of people don't realize is that this deck very strongly requires you to have early damage on the board. And again, I've played this deck. I played about 50 to 60 games of burn as well at the time of recording this, both in Plat and in Diamond. So, take those 2 different metrics for whatever it's worth. And it's very, very difficult to win games if you don't get in those first 2 key attacks. So again, turn 1 and 3 or turn 2 and 4. And yes, there's going to be some games where you just draw the nuts, right? You have triple Boom Crew Rookie, like, oh, how do I possibly lose, a type of thing, right? But that's kind of a meh point. Because that's the exception, not the rule, right? Obviously, if you draw the nuts every game, or if you get like your Crimson Disciple and Imperialist combo, right? That's obviously going to be really insane if you get that in multiple. So that's not the average game. That's kind of more, again, the exception. But it's kind of still worth knowing because I'm sure that those win rate percentages do vary quite a bit. So again, burn, if you saw the TLG snapshot meta report, I'll probably put a link in that in the description as well. This is still currently the king of the meta. However, if you look at the data that I posted, again, only based on 65 days, I posted this on Twitter, burn is actually falling off in terms of the play rate. And you might argue, oh, it's because people are already masters or they got tired, they want to play other decks. We don't have that full data, but the data, again, based on my personal sample size of 65, which is not a lot, but it's more than I've seen most other people put out because nobody wants to talk data. They only want to talk about emotions. But burn seems to be falling off. It's still very, very good. And an interesting point that happened is, again, so for those that don't know, I am part of Team Leviathan Gaming. Every week we get together, we have a discussion about the meta. And our EU side of the team, burn has fallen off. People just don't want to play it anymore because it's so bad in the meta. But then the problem becomes is that there's this very sharp triangle of where it's 3 to 4 decks that just directly counter one another. And it becomes more of like the Magic design type of thing. So that's where I will say that's where I think that the burn discussion needs to happen. And the deck does need to be changed because that's not a Runeterra meta, right? That's not what we want to see or what we have seen with set 1. So that's where the change should happen. So again, now speaking more to back to the deck, because this was the kind of elephant in the room I want to address. How do you beat this deck? Obviously, just get your 1-drops, chump block them out of the way. Vile Feast and Grasp are very, very important, but something to keep in mind is that you still have to play around their Noxian Fervor. So if you have spell mana up and they go under that 3 so they can't cast Noxian Fervor, even if you're losing some board positioning, depending on what their board might be looking like, you sometimes just need to immediately fire off that Grasp just so you can heal up. Again, a lot of the games really, in at least my testing, the healing is nice, but what's been more important is if you hit those early drops or not. If they connect with a rear guard for 3, and then if you even stumble and you can't block, 2 or more of their units by the time they do that next attack, generally that's the point you're losing the game, and it's not necessarily the direct burn. Now, again, the direct burn is strong, but you have to respect their early game, and if you don't, it's going to be really bad, right? I think about the Karma Lux deck that wants to do nothing until turn 3. And I'm sorry, but you should lose to aggro in every instance in that case. The game starts on turn 1, which, might be a controversial opinion is if Twitter and Reddit would tell me anything, but the game starts at turn 1. Not saying that every deck needs to have exactly a turn 1 drop, but you need to respect it and make sure that your deck is tuned. So if that's including maybe Eye of the Dragon, right? So you have an early 2 drop that can generate you some value. There's other things that you can be doing. Please, please, please take that in consideration when you build these decks. Don't try to be starting the game on turn 3, turn 4, you're going to get punished. And again, rightfully, you deserve to be in that case. Moving on from there, we have the Mono Demacia list. This one can be really interesting. I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much as we're going through this. But Demacia just has really good anti-control stuff in general from a Shadow Isles perspective. So both Badger Bear, which I'm sure a lot of people have been seeing a lot lately, and Grizzled Ranger, those are 2 very tough cards for us to deal with. They're tanky, they get a lot of value, and our chip damage usually takes, 3 or 4 cards. So yes, we can stall long enough, but it can be difficult. The other thing that's kind of annoying here is Ranger's Resolve. This card, if you spend several turns trying to line up a Withering Wail, that if they have just a single Ranger's Resolve for when you're trying to do Withering Wail, it's going to feel really bad. So often what you'll find yourself trying to do is to bait them into using it, like maybe hitting a Fiora or something with like a Grasp, right? They probably really want to protect that. So they use Ranger's Resolve, still feels bad, it survives, right? But then hopefully on the next turn, you're able to line up some blockers plus Withering Wail, where now you're getting a better trade-off in your card value, that you're killing 2 or 3 things instead of just getting Ranger's Resolve if you didn't make that previous play and just feeling bad about it, right? So you really have to change how you would play the deck in terms of using your early value blockers in trade so that you can get that kind of incremental damage over time versus knowing that you have to throw out a spell, see if they have it. It becomes like the check card, for lack of a better word. See if they have it. If they don't, you're clear to go on the next turn, but it feels really, really bad with how strong Ranger's Resolve can be. That said, things like Brood Awakening, where you're getting multiple blockers off 1 card, can be very important, but Cythria of the Bold is a very, very annoying card to deal with. I will admit that at the time, thinking back about my games, I probably saw less Cythrias than I should have, just from like a average game experience standpoint. But I won quite a few games off of them still having Cythria. But I think I was even more ahead just naturally in the games that they didn't have it, right? You can beat Bannerman, you can eventually grind out Grizzled Ranger and stuff, but multiple Cythrias is really, really rough because it could just invalidate your spider blockers, and then suddenly you're taking a ton of damage. So that is something to keep in mind. And then single combat is just an annoying card in general. So again, you'll kind of notice this trend of with Demacia, especially if they have like the Loyal Badger Bear and Bannerman and Grizzled Ranger, right? Because they can potentially heal through those, or pseudo heal, I should say, right? Because they gain a stat. They can heal through some of that chip damage, which can also make it rough, but it is very winnable. And then again, in general, you get to a point where you drop a They Who Endures. Sometimes it's just a 10-10, and you're like, all right, well, this is good enough. I've done my chip damage, so you only have like 2 HP on your best blocker, so you're still getting enough damage kind of over the top. And generally what's nice too is if you open up a very aggressive opener with like Elise plus a Brood Awakening and maybe some Vile Feast obviously in there as well for more spider generation, you can chip away at their damage with the HP of their units while also still getting in Nexus damage, which again, you still want to make sure you're thinking about the offensive side of it as well, just to make your either atrocities better or your They Who Endure just connect and win in some cases. A list I didn't see too much of, but was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, is the Vi and Heimerdinger package. So overall, I will say on paper, this should be one of your worst matchups, or at least anything with Ionia, right? Having to play around Will of Ionia to bounce your unit in response to Atrocity and or Deny to just flat out stop it is really annoying at the end of the day. However, you can outplay them, and I did quite a bit, just by either holding up to Atrocities or, again, trying to bait out their earlier denies. One of the key things in this matchup, and it hurts, trust me, I know, but baiting out a deny when they're only running 2 into your, say, Brood Awakening will clear the way for your They Who Endures later. Again, this is kind of a weird trade-off that you have to make, because when your Brood Awakening gets denied and gets countered in that regard, your They Who Endure is going to be that much weaker. So the chip damage that you're getting in becomes that much more important. And this is where Elise kind of did a lot of work for me, just in terms of that early chip damage or blockers, right? The elusive package that they have can still be very difficult to deal with, but what's really nice about this matchup is if you get kind of that unit board advantage, right? If you think about Blighted Caretaker, getting to chip away at a few things as well, they don't have Withering Wail, so you can actually just go wide, and a lot of times I was just like attacking out with 1/1 spiders, and you can still get in a significant amount of damage against this deck, right? They play so few followers, they usually have to play Heimerdinger when they're behind. And if you grasp a Heimerdinger, or again, even if you use like the Blighted Caretaker plus the Fury of the North package, once that's gone and they can't generate those like value blockers turn over turn, the deck just falls apart. You do not care about Vi. And like, honestly, and I might be speaking just from a pure, someone who played 65 games with They Who Endure, Vi's not good, right? Vi's position in the meta right now just feels like a generic 5/5 tough challenger. Obviously in this list, this is like the best list for it because it's very easy to level her up, get her to flip, get more value. I get that, but we think about like the Bannerman Vi decks that we've been seeing, it just feels bad. And when you have a 5/5 tough and challenger, it's good in a creature heavy focus meta, and so maybe that's just fine. But it's a card that I just was like, okay, my opponent wasted their turn 5 playing this. Cool. You kill my Elise, I still hit you for like 5 damage because why not? It's like, this doesn't do anything. And I think one game they were able to flip it. The 5 damage, ooh, wow, big and scary. It hurt. But they weren't connecting for 10. So why does it matter, right? So again, thinking in mind of this deck, we have chump blockers for days. So Vi is just usually not getting through. The way you lose to this matchup is if they have the Heimerdinger value, they actually pump out their elusive turrets, and what's really annoying, if you don't have a response for it, is Vi's champion spell, which lets them just keep pumping up a unit by 2, and that's usually where you lose, right? Elusives are still very, very good. Again, we do have the counterplay. If Heimerdinger's not leveled up, they only have 2 denies, right? So you bait out the early deny on your Brood Awakening, and then you punish them with a Withering Wail, and you're like, okay, that's it. I guess I win now. Like, it's literally that easy in a lot of cases. Again, I think from like the Ionia side alone, the deny and the Will of Ionia, again, is going to be very, very rough for They Who Endures list, but you have a lot of counterplay against this list, surprisingly. The other side of this, which was an annoying matchup, is the just other Shadow Isle controls variant, in this case, Karina control. Again, Vi, you don't care about. I'm just not going to mention that here at all. But this is where it gets interesting. So they have their own Brood Awakening, which is kind of awkward because it can stall you out in terms of just getting that chip damage in. And then you play this like really awkward Withering Wail metagame, right? Where like you both have Brood Awakening, you both want to get Elise value, and then you both have the best counter available, right? But the cool thing here is like their big play is Ladros into Burn Spell plus Atrocity, where we're just like, I'm going to sacrifice all my guys, play They Who Endure, attack you. And again, usually going to be for big damage. They don't have a way to really remove it. Now, again, at the time we're recording this, there needs to be something said about Vengeance just not seeing play. This list had a one of, but a lot of the lists I've been seeing, or again, their own They Who Endure list, nope, nobody is playing Vengeance right now, right? So if you see Shadow Isles, you can just be like, all right, well, I'm still going to play around it because that's the right thing to do if they go on once they go under 7 mana, which isn't hard. But you're like, okay, cool. Double Atrocity you, I win. And that's actually how I did win a match, which was really funny. I wish I was recording it. I had a Tryndamere in play, and I used Atrocity, and so when he dies, he flips over, right? So my opponent like played a Ladros, spent all their mana, and I'm like, okay, I have 12 mana. I get to double Ladros my Tryndamere on you for lethal. Good game. And like, that's fair because at that point, you're in such a late game position against these control decks where I was certainly dead on the following turn. There would have been otherwise nothing I could do with it, right? Because Ladros is a very, very single powerful card that'll drop your Nexus health, I should say, from 20 to 10, right? And then from there, it's very easy to either drop a couple Karinas, fire off some, Mystic Shots, Static Shocks. There's a lot of reach that they have in this list to burn you out of nowhere. And I think against other lists, Vi might be a little more scary, right? Because I really like this kind of dynamic. You have Ladros, you get their HP low, then you have a Vi where you can then chip away, 5 more health while removing one of their units. That's still very good. Or if you just have straight up removal, right? You put yourself in an instance where it's Commander Ladros, get you down to 10 HP, play Vi, they play a blocker, remove the blocker, Vi hits face for 10, good game, right? That's it. Or Atrocity if you want to play like that side of it as well. And I really like this list, and I think this is one that's just going to develop more once the meta becomes a bit more healthy, all things considered. And Karina Control was really good last set. It's still good this set. I don't expect this to go anywhere. It's probably a little less play than what it should be right now, but it still is very good against the burn deck. And, again, every Shadow Isles deck is, and that's kind of why people are playing it. So, again, against this matchup, you really just have to play out to your They Who Endures. Generally, I like to keep it in my opener, and I like to keep some kind of glimpse as well, because right, they're going to be very focused on just trying to 1-for-1 remove your units. So you want to be able to play like the haha gotcha part of it, where you're then getting to draw some units. So in this one, you're really looking for more keep the early They Who Endure. If you see it, it's going to get value. And Atrocity is more of a greedy keep. I would never keep Atrocity, or in general, I never keep Atrocity in my opener, just because in our deck we run 3 of it. I would like to cut that back to 2 eventually, but I think 3 is fine for now, where you want to see more of your token advantages early on, so Elise, Brood Awakening. Even Omen Hawk is good, again, for burn matches, but also for buffing your deck. So in this, it really comes down to the Withering Wail kind of meta game that you play between these two matchups, and then just understanding you need a little bit of chip damage, but generally speaking, they're not going to be able to kill your They Who Endure. So if you can ramp it up very quickly, like 15, it's just going to be a good game for them, right? I guess the best case scenario would try to play around the Thermo Beam, but generally it's you connect with They Who Endure, and then you just Atrocity their face anyways, especially if they waste their turn to play Thermo Beam, you're going to win on the spot. From there, we have the Karma Ezreal list. Again, this is one of the things like... Will of Ionia and Deny should be good against us, but the rest of the deck otherwise is so weak that I never really felt that pressured against them, right? Like, Ezreal is very scary flipping. It still is. It's still a very good card, and obviously Karma can do some value later on in the game if you get to flipper plus burn, but I never really felt pressured by this list. It doesn't feel, that strong in general, because, right, they don't have Withering Wail, so you get in so much chip damage value just based on what you have access to. And the thing is, that's really nice, is they are super weak to a early Elise, and an early Elise will just generate you so much value with either chip damage, and again, having stuff die to it to make your They Who Endures bigger, that you don't hate seeing it. Now, yes, they could have like a Thermo Beam, but that's kind of, again, where those games come in where you have Omen Hawk plus Elise. Just feels really, really strong, and it's kind of insane how much value you can get out of just ignoring Eye of the Dragon in a lot of cases, and instead save your more removal for either, obviously, Karma or Chump Up. So, Static Shock is like the worst thing that you have to worry about, but when we're comparing Static Shock to, Withering Wail, it's like, who cares? So you killed 2 spiders and you drew a card. Good job. So, I'm really happy that this matchup didn't feel as bad as I thought it was going to be. Again, keeping in mind, you do have to play smart. You have to get out their denies. You have to get out their wills, which in a lot of cases, they will try to use their wills to save their karma. So I guess I should mention this. The way to kind of bait those out is prioritize your Elise wait for them to play their Karma or a high value target, and they'll just try to keep bouncing your release. And then again, who cares in that point, right? You have a 2-drop that you can just replay for value, where they have to protect their Karma. And again, because they play so few units and we have so much removal, they'll often feel pressure enough where they have to play their Karma. They will open up that weakness. Or again, you have the Blighted Caretaker plus Fury of the North package, which can still just kill it out of nowhere, which is really, really good for us. So they'll burn a lot of resources just to try to save it. And ultimately, that just makes our late game better anyway. So this really comes down to knowing what spells you have to play around and how to bait them out of your opponent. So again, with all Ionia-based decks having both Deny and Will of Ionia, those are kind of the 2 cases, right? So Brood Awakening, bait out their Denies, and then Fury of the North on a high-value target, bait out their Will of Ionias. Generally, if they've played a Deny and they've played a Will, you're pretty safe to go for it. But again, they'll usually use a Will to prevent They Who Endure from connecting because they've already taken so much chip damage from your Spider. So they're just always behind. And until this list gets a little bit more refined, right, and they have a few more flex spots where they really find out where they need to be once aggro gets tuned down a bit, I think this will still be a positive matchup, even though it shouldn't be on paper based on set 1 kind of results. But there is an interesting amount of counterplay that we do have against this that didn't make me think that this matchup was as bad as it was going to be. The list now I hated seeing. That did feel a lot of it was really rough to play against. So the Karma Lux deck, I think this is one of the better win rates that I had, if I remember correctly, but it's one of those things where like it has the parts of Demacia that you hate seeing and it has the parts of Ionia that you hate seeing. So put them together and it's just a big old mess of I hate this deck. Right? So you have the control pieces from Ionia, which are very strong and counteract our gameplay directly. And then some games they just play like triple Badger Bear and you're like, wow, this sucks. Those guys are really, really big. And then they'll follow up with a couple Grizzly Rangers. And Radiant Guardian 2 is just another beefy, tough unit, right? Like, you can chump block them for days, but at some point, you're losing that kind of value where they just have bigger units. You have to waste too many cards to interact with their board, that if you miss out on, like, a well-timed They Who Endure, which, again, they can just bounce anyways, you're like, wow, yeah, this matchup feels pretty awful. So in terms of all of the kind of the Ionia /X variants, right? So Karma Lux, Karma Ezreal, and then even Shadow Karma, which I'm not going to mention in this video, but still I think I saw twice in the ladder, if I remember correctly. This is by far my least favorite version to run into. Again, just because the followers are so bloody strong. And, overall, I think this kind of has a rough spot in the meta, but it'll still have a lot of gameplay. And I think once the aggro side of things gets tuned down, this is going to be a very unfun deck to run into. And I'm legitimately scared about what the meta looks like if there's no longer an aggro deck to keep this in check. Now, will Riot go that far? Who knows? But this deck is just nasty. Just straight up nasty. Once they can like drop the Radiant Guardians for other, important spells that they want to be running in the 3 health potions, yeah, it's going to suck. There's just no other way to say it. It's going to be crazy. So that said, how do we beat it, right? So this falls into a weird category where you have to value your Brood Awakening because you just need chump blockers, right? But you also want to bait out their Deny. And I've seen some lists run like 2 health potions and 2 Deny. So that's, again, all these lists are provided by Team Leviathan in Gaming and our snapshot. I just pulled those for the sake of the video. And this one has more of an interesting take where if they have a lot of pressure, right, then you have to bait out a different, like a Grasp or something so your Brood Awakening can resolve so you can actually like live long enough, where if they're maybe stumbling on followers and they maybe are not having much of a board presence, right, then you want to try to bait out the Deny with Brood Awakening so you have your other like removal spells if they only have 1 or 2 units so you can get to the late game. It's a really weird matchup to play out and it just doesn't feel good in a lot of cases. And then again, they still have Remembrance, so like just getting a 5/5 off Remembrance sometimes is like, all right, well, this still sucks, right? It's just good Demacia cards can give Shadow Isles, or the Spider side of Shadow Isles, a really, really rough time. So again, you just want to go wide, hopefully get in some chip damage, and then eventually finish them off with the They Who Endure, which can be difficult to connect with, depending on what they have. A list that's kind of fallen off considerably is Misfortune Scouts, and this one, again, is kind of rough just because of the good Demacia stuff that they run. But something I want to acknowledge here is that Misfortune's ability. So when you go to attack with Misfortune, her ability triggers and deals 1 damage to all blocking enemies and their Nexus. So This goes one step further in that your what would be chump blockers are now getting 0 value, right? You're getting no chip damage on your opponent's units, which can be extremely, extremely rough because, as I've mentioned before, you want to get in like that Vile Feast ping damage, the chump blocker ping damage, and then hopefully line up a really, really nice Withering Wail. Again, this list doesn't have it, but some run, including Batterman. This one has Elmheart to give +1/+1. They still have Ranger's Resolve. They still have back-to-back in Pursuit to punish you in certain situations. So it can be really rough to kind of come back from this. Now, again, there are some cases where they just don't have the Ranger's Resolve. Your spiders become a 2/1, and you can just kind of chip them away like that. You know, Misfortune, you can just grasp and kill it. Quinn is pretty awkward because it has 4 HP, so that's another one that's kind of difficult to interact with in a lot of cases. But that's, again, where you really want to see your Blighted Caretaker plus Fury of the North combo to just punish them and knock out their units, right? They'll try to play like a Bright Steel Protector, but that's their only pure way to protect it. Like, they don't play any barriers out of their hand, right? So if something's on board, right, you do your Caretaker, you attack, and then use Fury of the North. So if they have the Bright Steel Protector, they'll still play it because they'll most likely, if they're a good player, know that it's coming, or they'll just, you know, anticipate that, hey, I should protect my most valuable unit anyway, which is still fine, right? So for this deck, really, again, this kind of falls into more of the just general aggro package in terms of what you want to look for. Find your early drops, find your Brood Awakening. Those chump blocks really help you stabilize, and then eventually you can just get there with a big enough They Who Endure. But again, keep in mind the Badger Bear and Grizzled Ranger are going to be very tough because they will take multiple of your cards to eventually deal with, and especially if you go for like that back-to-back play, or if they go for the back-to-back play and you're trying to like get away chip damage or a grasp, you're going to be behind. So I think I did lose 2 games because of the back-to-back, and it's really, really strong. But, you know, you can't have all the answers all the time, so definitely something to keep in mind. The deep deck is an interesting one, but I still want to mention it because I think, like, overall, it's a solid deck. I really do like the Miscall variants that I've been seeing. And I will say that, like, early on, I didn't like Maokai in this list at all. And honestly, like, I still don't care for it that much to the case where I would even cut it back to a 1 of. I never agreed with 3. 2 is nice just because there's, like, if they're playing a super slow deck, then sure, you get the extra toss value, right? But for Maokai, at least in the majority of games that I've played it, really it's just there for, like, the Mirror, which is a whole metagame, a different video I could have a discussion on. And then just, like, the greedy control decks like Ezreal, where it's like, okay, I high rolled into an early Maokai, there goes your deck, and then, you know, you probably don't have enough burn in hand because then you still have ways to keep your health at 20. I do like this deck because it's really interesting to play like the Atrocity War, for lack of a better word, but this game is kind of, this is where I'd say it's like kind of not fun because it's ultimately 2 combo decks that are just kind of doing their own thing and you know, that doesn't really care about what the other opponent's doing, right? Like, our game plan is have a They Who Endure, put out a bunch of tokens, slam it at the wall, we don't care if it dies, get a They Who Endure Atrocity. Their game plan is stall until Nautilus, drop a bunch of sea monsters, get in for 1 attack, and then Atrocity to finish off the game. So the Abyssal Eyes, right, are really annoying, but most lists have cut back to like 1 or 2. So we can just still chump block their board, right? Obviously, Nautilus has Fearsome, which is really annoying. If they get the like Terror of the Depths or whatever the card is that gives all sea monsters Fearsome, that can be a little problematic. But, you know, they have only 2 Withering Wails. I've seen some lists even cut back to 1 in some cases where our spiders just get more value at the end of the day, right? Like, we don't care how much that they're tossing because they have much more RNG, where ours is just draw value, right? Because we have 6 different things that draw us cards. So it's like, cool, we're getting all the information because we're seeing what you toss, right? So if they toss an Atrocity, you're like, okay, I win the game on the spot, right? Like, that's how the matchup goes. Cool. Or if they have, like, if you know there might be like, oh, they're teching 1 Vengeance, right? If they toss the Vengeance, which again goes back to the discussion of just nobody's running Vengeance right now, you're like, cool, now I don't even care about my Atrocity in the sense I know it's going to resolve when I need it to, right? And they might do like Atrocity into your Atrocity, but in that case, like, your They Who Endure should be like a 15-15 to a 20-20. Our stuff's bigger, it naturally has Overwhelm, unless you drew like triple Abyssal Eye because you hit them all off the Hunters. Like, you shouldn't lose to this deck, right? Like, the They Who Endure package is just much more streamlined and more efficient at what it wants to be doing than the deep deck. Just plain and simple at the end of the day. So this is one I'm not really worried about from a matchup perspective. Just, again, make sure you have your stuff that you need in terms of vomiting out tokens earlier. let stuff die, keep your HP high, just so they just can't atrocity you, right, with the 13, and then, yeah, atrocity them back first. We have more copies of it. Our combo is more consistent, right? Like, I can't stress it enough. Like, at the end of the day, we're just a more consistent deck at what they want to be doing. One of the last few decks here to round things up is the Keg Control or Rex Control, I've seen some people call it. I just don't like this deck, period. Like, I think it's very good at countering the aggro meta, just in terms of like, hey, getting a Withering Wail off of like double powder kegs is really good, right? Like dealing 3 to their entire board, that's insane. And I've lost to that, or I've lost my board, I should specify, because of that. Then they attack out for like one big swing, but it's not bad, right? Like, again, our spiders just do all the work. Make It Rain can be kind of annoying because they have Make It Rain plus that they're going to have some number of Withering Wail. But at the end of it, we just have a really big They Who Endure that they can't deal with, right? And Riptide Rex can be pretty annoying because it's really good at picking up our board and getting easy face damage in, but you really don't care about this deck. Like, it's a very, very one-sided matchup. And again, like back at the win rate thing, I had like a 92% about it. So again, this just falls under the same package, right? You don't have to worry about Deny. You don't have to worry about Will of Ionia. Search for early drops. Try to sneak in an Elise for extra value. Play a Brood Awakening and win. That's about it, right? And then if they try to play like a Grasp, make sure you have Glimpse to counter it. It's really that simple. In this case, this list doesn't have much of a discussion around it. So the last thing is, should this be nerfed? No, I see a lot of people complaining about Atrocity, but at the end of the day, it's just a nod to how much aggro decks are holding Ionia out of the meta. And, I don't think aggro is perfect, but I definitely appreciate how there's less Ionia than there was in set 1, which is allowing for different types of decks to appear, right? So currently right now, there's 11 or 12 decks that can get to Masters, where in set 1 there was 14 or 15, if I remember correctly. But if you think about those Masters lists, it was just like different versions of Ionia where, They Who Endure completely dropped off the face of the earth, right? So there's a discussion there to be had about how many unique archetypes are playable currently versus how many decks were playable in set 1 in terms of which one is healthier. Now, if we can dial back aggro just slightly and still have the more diverse meta that we have, which I know is a crazy thing to say, but again, there's a separate discussion that needs to be said about unique archetypes versus number of decks, right? How much do people care about, 2 or 3 different elusive decks that are all Demacia and Ionia, right? That's not as good as saying having a They Who Endures in the meta, which is a brand new archetype and region combination in that regard. So that's kind of the separation I'm trying to make here. So again, I think aggro will change a little bit, but I'm not certain that it's going to be nerfed into the ground, as a lot of people are saying. But Ionia does need to step back into the spotlight a little bit just to have, again, hopefully more unique decks popping up without Ezreal being oppressive again. So, it's one of those, which way will this trade-off happen? Who knows? We'll see. But with that, it's a longer video, and I do apologize for that, but I just hit Masters with it, and I want to kind of do a roundup of it discussion. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more like this that kind of talks about individual matchups versus just like a highlight versus gameplay type of thing, definitely let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more Legends of Runeterra content. And then lastly, don't forget, most of my content is actually on Twitch, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/CosmicPlays. So with that, it is super late. I need to wrap up this video. And thanks for sticking around this long, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.